Hello everyone, this is CJ with Cycletron. Today I'd like to talk about why your motorcycle dealer probably won't work on your old motorcycle. Old being over 20 years in age. Sometimes old means over 10 years in age, depending on your dealer. There's a lot of reasons for this. I've been seeing in the comments, particularly among Harley riders, some frustration with dealers not working on their older Harleys or difficulty in getting parts. And I can understand this frustration, but what I wanted to talk about is what is causing that, and also to really show that it's not just Harley. It's an issue with every brand of motorcycle in my experience. So let's just go through a few examples. If you've watched any of my recent videos, you've heard me talk about my Yamaha 600R, the bike I refer to as a Copart Special. It's a 2005 Yamaha YZF 600R, just an old sport bike that I salvaged and got back on the road and just use as a second bike for around town riding, kind of goofing around. But when I got it, one of the things that was wrong with it is it had really leaky fork seals, which I had the forks rebuilt, and now they're starting to leak again. So it told me that the fork tubes probably has some nicks and scratches on them that's messing up the seals. So I went and ordered new fork tubes. So this is a 2005. Yamaha built a lot of these bikes, but it turns out that there's only 5 factory-made fork tubes in existence, and four of them are in Japan. One's in the U.S. The problem is I need 2, so it's probably going to take me 2 months to get my fork tubes in and get those forks rebuilt. So I went through this recently on another bike. I had a GTS 1000 back in the day, and a couple of years ago I had a chance to get it back, basically not the exact same motorcycle, but the exact same model. So I bought it from a guy in California on eBay, and my thought was kind of turn it into an adventure. It's a 1993 bike, so this is a couple of years ago, so the bike was about 25 years old. My thought was, I'll fly one way to California, I'll go to the guy's house, pick up the bike, and I'll ride it to a local dealer, because I knew the tires were old. I'll just get it serviced. I'll get the tires replaced, the oil changed, and I'll just bleed the brake fluid while I'm at it. So I decided I better call some dealerships ahead of time to make sure that I could find somebody who could do it, in a quick turnaround. So in Southern California, where this bike was located, there's well over a dozen Yamaha dealerships. And after calling about the 8th or 9th dealer who told me they don't work on bikes that old, I gave up and just had the bike shipped to me. So, again, I'm hearing this is happening with older Harley Davidson motorcycles. I had an experience with a Honda I tried to bring back to life earlier this year. So what I'm finding is the reason behind this is that even taking something that was made in large numbers, parts just aren't that available anymore. So the last thing a dealer wants to do is bring a bike into his shop for the intent of fixing one thing, and then he finally either can't get that part or something else breaks in the process. I have this old Yamaha Virago, and we restored it ourselves, but ended up having a bolt break off in the speedometer hub. And so I was going to go buy a new speedometer hub and found out there was no more in existence. So I had to drill the bolt out of the hub and make myself a new stud and JB welded it into place and was managed to basically recover the old one. But this is what you run into with older bikes, just unavailability of parts. I had a dealer that sold me a 600 Shadow as is. He told me he didn't know what all was wrong with it. It was just as is, sale only. So I bought it, found a few things wrong with it, then found out it had a bad rectifier. I was putting a full charge on the battery, and after a short ride I'd be stranded on the side of the road. Well, it needed a new rectifier. So They ordered the rectifier, got the wrong one in, and this was at the beginning of March of this year, and they couldn't get a hold of the place that sold the rectifiers to get them to send them the right one. So that bike was in there for like a month. Finally, I said, look, I'll see if I can find the rectifier, because I'd bugged the parts guy enough. And I was able to get the rectifier in a couple days, got it to them, they put it on, and I was out of there. But obviously there's an issue with getting parts. Dealers don't want to be in a situation where they have to call a dozen people to try and find a part. It's just there's not any money in it. Sometimes you have service people who are willing to do the work, but they're in one department, and the people responsible for getting the parts to them are in another department. And there's almost only so much pressure that the service department could apply to get the parts. So I've got a good dealer near me. I've got a good relationship with him, and he so far has been willing to work on my old bikes. And he's the exception, not the rule. But I've bought a lot of motorcycles from him. I try and get him to work on my old bikes if there's something I can't do on them over the winter when they're slow. I cut them some slack if they can't find parts. So we have an understanding. So my advice would be, if you've got an older bike, before you take it into the shop, call ahead and make sure they're going to work on it. And if the person that's answering the phone at the service desk says no, ask to talk to the service manager and see if you can make your case. But I'm finding now that even with metric motorcycles, a lot of dealers won't even touch them if they're only 10 years old or slightly older. Certainly most people won't touch them if they're over 20 years old. And I think this is particularly frustrating for Harley Davidson owners, because Harley Davidson has only incrementally changed their bikes. I mean, there's a lot of commonality among models, and they went many years with a given engine design, and there's huge number of people supplying parts for these bikes. It just seems unfathomable that one, you couldn't find the part, and two, you couldn't get somebody to work on them. But there's some things I've been learning here lately. That old Virago that we got restored back running, I did everything, but the carbs were still a little bit rough and needed to be synced. And so again, I went to this dealer I got a good relationship with, and it was in the winter, and he put his one service guy on who's really had a lot of experience working on old bikes, and new carburetors. Nothing against people coming out of motorcycle technician school these days, but just how much experience do they have with carbureted bikes versus fuel injected bikes? My youngest son has a Kawasaki Z125, and the engine light came on, and we couldn't think of what was wrong with it. And so we took it into the dealer. They plugged it into the diagnostic computer and said it had a bad speed sensor. So luckily that was 2 weeks inside of when the warranty was going to expire, and they replaced it for free. But even there, it took 6 weeks to get the part in. So unfortunately, as bikes are being manufactured, there's benefits to electronics, and there's also a lot of downside. But the more electronics they come with, the more they're turning into appliances. And I've had this experience with cars. If there's something wrong with the car and they plug it into the diagnostic computer and there's no codes that come up, they're dead in the water. They're not going to do old school things like pull the plugs and check the compression, or do check the exhaust and smell it, the residue on their fingers to try and figure out what's going on. They're just going to send you home and say, hey, if something else happens, bring it back and we'll plug it in again. I mean, I'm kind of exaggerating here, but that's what it seems like sometimes. So I guess from a business standpoint, you could see why a lot of dealers now don't want to be stuck with working on these older bikes. It's like if you've ever done any home plumbing repair, that's always a chore, because you start out trying to fix one thing, and then you got to fix 3 or 4 other things in the process, particularly due to corrosion. So I just wanted to kind of relate these experiences and put them in context. So my recommendation is, if you talk to a service manager, and they're not going to take your bike in because it's too old, or they're afraid they can't get parts. Usually they'll know somebody in the community that's an independent mechanic that will work on your bike. So I think that's where this is going to go, is that you're going to have to develop a relationship with a local independent person to work on your bikes. You know, there's been 100 Harley dealerships closed in the last year in this country, and I'm hoping that some of those folks are able to go into business for themselves and continue to service Harleys that maybe the dealer won't service in the future because they're, quote, too old, or he's going to have resources, or she's going to have resources into finding those parts for you or rebuilding parts. Something that's just a completely different approach than you would get from a mainline dealership. So what are your experiences been with working on old bikes? I know a lot of people like to wrench on their own thing, on their own bike, and that makes a lot of sense. But sometimes either you don't have the time, or you get to the point where you just need some professional assistance. Where do you go? Are you at all concerned about being able to get your older bike serviced in the coming years? So again, please let me know your thoughts and experiences on this. And again, if you haven't already done so, please like and subscribe. Thanks very much.